Welcome to a different kind of doula. I am Maureen Curis, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Colleen Hughes, and our other colleague, Kathleen Putnam, is not on with us today. But we're part of the Gentle Passage Doula Collective, and we are a group of 5 of us that are end-of-life doulas, but the 3 of us host this show. And today we were thinking about the different type of burial options that are available. And, so often we think of the traditional burial options, the full casket, the whole ceremony, and then there's cremation. So what I've learned over the last few years, especially during COVID, is that both of those can have a really hard impact on the environment. I always thought I was going to be cremated and plant a tree or something. And what I found out is that cremation leaves a huge carbon footprint, and that planting a tree on cremated remains is not always the best for the tree or the environment. And I've learned about different options, different burial options, and that's what we're going to bring to you today. So I'm going to talk about different kinds of green burials. And Colleen, what are you going to share?
Well, my interests are in, I recently went to Recompose, so I actually got to experience the inside of that facility and their organization. And then I have an interest in non-organic reduction or terramation. There's several names for it. And then, of course, aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis, which is another form of burial. But green burial, I know, Maureen, you've talked about a lot of just the natural placing the body in the ground in a green burial site, etc. So I just think that there's so much now that people are not always aware of, and they're just becoming aware of.
It's funny, Colleen, because I had become aware of green burials. And when I first learned about green burials, I thought, oh, that is really beautiful. It's a beautiful way of burying the body. It's kind to our environment. And then I learned about terramation by visiting Recompose and Return Home, 2 human composting facilities here in Seattle, which you'll talk about. And then it was brought to my attention recently. I was told about a Lands Conservation Trust burial ground. And the one that I was introduced to happens to be in Tennessee. Larkspur is the name of it. But the more I learned, the more I realized that this is an amazing way to look at burying the human body. Just talking about some of the environmentally friendly ways. Cremation, like I said, I thought I was going to do cremation. Well, according to the funeral industry in 2020, 56% of Americans chose cremation. And then the whole body burial that's in the traditional casket, those take up a lot of precious ground space, and they require chemicals to embalm and preserve the bodies. And the caskets alone, they're lined. Usually, a lot of the graves are lined with cement, and the caskets placed into that. But that can be very, very hard on the land, and that's something that I think more and more, with us just having our hottest summer on record, after last summer was the hottest summer on record, we need to start thinking about. So this conservation burial grounds, Larkspur, just really piqued my interest. And what conservation burial, it's natural burial that goes a step further than traditional green burial. Right now, there's 350 cemeteries in the US and Canada that will allow green burials, meaning non-embalmed and naturally occurring caskets. So something that will decompose over time. But they go a step further to conserve the land. And there's a lot of protocols that go with that, so that the burials don't harm the surrounding ecosystems. And if and so they also facilitate ecological restoration. And what I found so interesting was the one that I've looked at the most closely is Larkspur in Tennessee. And they've created this beautiful environment. They've stayed with the natural ecological system and nature preserve, but it's a place that people can come and they can visit with their families and they can either hike. It's a place where people go to hike, and they might not go to the burial grounds, but they can wander through and might not even realize it's a burial ground because everything is in strict guidelines to protect the environment. So I just think it's so interesting, and yeah, I'd love to share more
You know, Maureen,
perspectives
when you were
on.
talking about the environment and all the policies, uh, first of all, I know one thing: they can't have a body that's embalmed.
Right.
So so that it's just natural. And because embalming fluid leaks out into the soil. And so that's toxic in itself. And I don't think people understand that. They're worried about, I mean, they want to preserve the body for viewing or something, but and then into the land. And really, it's not really necessary.
And you know what I find interesting? No, it's not. So people have asked with green burials or this land conservation burial, um, won't animals dig up the bodies? I mean, truly, you think of those things, and but they're buried at a depth of 3.5 feet minimum. It could be a little bit deeper, but as the body just naturally breaks down, it does not affect the groundwater at all. They've done lots of testing. There's no effect on the groundwater, and there's no risk of animals. There's never been a case that I could find. And speaking to one of the directors of Larkspur, there's not been any animals that have what am I trying to say? That have disrupted the grave site.
Disrupted it. Yeah.
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 Yeah, they haven't tried to dig up the bodies, anything like that. And that was something I had never really thought of until someone said, gosh, what happens if an animal comes along and digs up the body?
Yeah, yeah. And I hadn't actually thought of that. That's
I know.
true.
I know. When someone said that to me, so I did ask this gentleman, and then I did do a little research. But you know what I like about this conservation burial grounds? Right now, there's 11 in the United States, and I was really excited to find that there's one here in Washington State. There's a number in North Carolina, Florida, Ohio,
Yeah.
one up in Maine, one in Virginia. But one of their one of the ways they steward the land is that they have to commit to conserving or restoring 20 acres to back to its natural habitat, and 5 acres. They can do only 5 acres if they're surrounding protected land. So they're all about protecting the land, and there has to be a guarantee for preservation of the burial ground by conservation easements, and that's enforced into perpetuity. So this land is really being dedicated not to have some strip mall or housing that they don't do strip malls anymore, at least here in the Seattle area. There are all these, high rise things, but there won't be ever a risk of a housing development being built on this land that's in a trust. And each conservation burial ground has to partner either with a government agency or a nonprofit conservation organization to really monitor and hold that and enforce the easement so that it is protected.
Well, that's really interesting. You know, the one thing as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about the space one saves. When I think of aquamation or terramation, the space, because we're running out of space in cities. So these lands too are preserved, you
Mhm.
know, in a different way. And I don't know how far bodies are buried apart or whatever, but I'm sure, and the markers are different. It's not big gravestones,
No,
right?
they're usually natural stone.
Yeah,
And that, if the family chooses that, or but everything's marked by a GPS locator, so
that's
if
great.
the family comes back, they can go and find the grave, and it might be a small, but they're usually small, they're usually flush with the ground, so it's not like a big tombstone or anything. It's all in keeping with nature.
Well, I like the aquamation. First of all, I too, like yourself, wanted cremation, and then now I've moved to non-organic reduction or terramation or human composting. Those are other names. And then recently the aquamation's been very appealing too. There's a whole psychological thing to all of this. Some people, for instance, I think being buried in a casket, aside from being very costly and unnecessary for myself, um, it's what do I want to say? I feel claustrophobia closed in. Of course, I would know because I'm gone. But but you know, there's something about going back to the earth that's very appealing to me.
Yes.
And I was reading the other day about Archbishop Tutu, and I did not know this about him, that he did in death as he did in his life. He gave back to the earth, and that was his one of his big philosophies. And so he had aquamation. His
Wow.
body was placed in a box, and then as they process, then from the box they put him in a steel cylindrical container, which was for aquamation. And the scientific name for aquamation is alkaline hydrolysis. And it's actually the same process that's done when the body's laid in the soil. So only this is a combination of water flow, and there's of course temperature and alkalinity. So there's like it's amazing because it's like 90% no, or 95% water and 5% an alkali, which is potassium hydroxide, which is neutral, and it's not lye, it's not anything to eat your body, but it's between the temperature and oxygen and the water, gentle water flow, and it breaks down the bonds in the body. And so what you have at the end, and it's a short process, what you have at the end is the bones, which is your calcium phosphate. And what they do with that is they grind them, and it's a fine white powder. And what really is amazing to me about this beautiful, it looks like the beach, beautiful white powder. It's different than cremains when you go through a flame, because that's like chunky and smoky looking. And I thought to myself, how beautiful that families can take this powder. They can use it planting, or you can spread it like ashes. And so there you're not taking any space up, it's done for you, So I'm just fascinated with that.
Yeah, and you were the one that got me interested in aquamation and learning about it. And you've been such a great resource, but I didn't know Desmond Tutu did
I
aquamation.
just recently found that out. It was I don't know. When did he go? I think the process was in 2021. I'd have to go back to when he actually died, but he had a simple pine coffin, and they just transported the body to the steel cylindrical container, and it was just eco-friendly. He just wanted something that went back to the earth, and that's what was done. And he didn't die really that long ago. So
And I always thought cremation was eco-friendly. So it was really when I
yeah,
started thinking about this, or I think when I really, I sort of thought, okay, yeah, they're burning. But with COVID and all the deaths, hearing that there were burn bans in Los Angeles because they couldn't burn so many bodies because of the air quality, it really shocked me and made me think, wow, this is really not good for the environment. And so when you talked and spoke of aquamation, that was that was really interesting to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that you got to visit Return Home. We
And I
can
visited
compare that.
Recompose
And
also.
for Terramation, oh, and you did Recompose too. So it'd be interesting to see how you felt when I went to Recompose. First of all, it's in an industrial area. They both are.
Right.
And when you walk into Recompose, uh, it's another world. You do not know you are in an industrial area. And of course,
No.
all the buildings around it are kind of eco-friendly, positive in their businesses. And
Yes.
so you walk into Recompose and it's all natural wood and moss and plants. And I was like, oh, this is really pleasant, you know? And so they were great. I mean, they took us on a tour and we went to the backside where the pods are. And these things look like out of Star Trek.
Right. So they,
They're pods. They call them pods, and they're white.
right.
And I'm not sure what
Octagons.
kind of plasticized material they are, but they have a waiting room that's first of all, family can have a service in. And then they have a pod in that room that's a transporter. This is unbelievable. And you open the doors and you can place the body in. Um, it's usually, I think, in some kind of eco-friendly cardboard box or something, usually. And as they're doing their service, you see the body, and then the body just trans rolls right to the back end. They have 54 pods back there, and that's where they place it's a reusable vessel and everything, but they place the body on top of and cover it with alfalfa and straw and wood chips. And this is like this great environment for bacteria and microbes to begin to decompose the body. And so it's roughly 30 to 60 days. And I think the average really is 60 days because the body has to cool down after all the temperature adjustments and everything they go through. But it's transformed into soil about a cubic yard. Fits a pickup truck, the back of a pickup truck. But the bone fragments are processed the same way. There's a cremator or it's something that grinds them. There's names for that. And it's kind of the same equipment they use in cremations. But what was it like when you went to Return Home and your thoughts on Recompose? I have to get to Return Home.
Recompose. Well, I went to return home first because Recompose wasn't doing tours at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have to tell you, when I first heard about human composting, I thought, ugh, that's sort of creepy, And but I was thinking, wait, I'm a gardener. I love to garden. I love to dig in the soil. And I really, thought about that. Why do I think it's creepy? And as I learned more about it, I thought, what a beautiful process. And so then I decided, okay, Terramation, that's the way I'm going to, the burial I'm going to do. My problem is, I think green burial, this. And, but Recompose and Return Home, they're very different. Recompose, like you said, it has this beautiful setting. Return Home is also in a industrial area just south of Seattle. To have this, they need that industrial area where they can have the space
Yeah,
because the
I
machinery
agree.
and stuff that takes place. But where Return Home is different, they have square vessels. The families can come and they will lay the body on after it's been cleaned and bathed and the rituals of all of that.
Hmm.
And the families can put organic matter um, in with, so they can put mementos or trinkets or tokens or things, flowers. And I can't remember if Recompose allows that, but they let the family be
They
there.
they do.
They
They
do.
do. Because
That's
I
what I
had,
thought in that room.
yeah, yeah.
And so then once the body is sealed in the container, the families can decorate the outside of their containers. So when we were there were some that were plain, but there were also some decorated with magnets and photos and pictures, they're the same thing, but different things, stickers, whatever they wanted to put on that represented that person that mattered so much, their loved one. And what they didn't really anticipate at return home was that people would want to come and be with their loved one as they were going through the composting process. And so they created this environment where people could come and be there with them. And they've created these beautiful panels that are like, floor to ceiling, so 20 feet tall, that's like a woodland setting, and where the doors move so that the vessels containing the body are all covered with these, behind these panels. And then wherever their loved one is, they can move the panel and be there and with their vessel while they're there, just being with them. So they can come and go throughout the whole process. But that's what they didn't realize, is that people would want to be there during this 30 to 60-day process.
And
I do
that's
know Recompose, they do not have that ability.
no, no, they don't. That's
No, they
interesting.
don't.
Oh, wow,
But
that's
not
interesting.
everyone wants to be there, but the people that do. So it was really interesting. But
That's interesting.
it's a wonderful um alternative that is
Mm,
so environmentally friendly. And one of the things I would really encourage people to do, they do Recompose, I know, does virtual
hmm
tours. And so go on recompose dot is it dot com or dot org. We'll put it in our show notes, but you can sign up for a virtual tour.
And I thought the same for Return Home. Don't they have virtual? I know they have a film that takes you through when you go to their
They do have a
website.
film. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's worth looking into, because all of these things that, like I said, I thought human composting would be creepy. And now I think it's just fabulous.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm still torn between the two. I think the difference for me is in the length of time. And if you have people that your relatives and everybody live out of state, 30 to 60 days is a long time to receive something. Of course, you can have your service and everything before that. Um, whereas in acclimation, it can be overnight. I mean, it's not that long. So there's all these different things to consider. I was also thinking this question often comes up and has been asked of me, like, can you bury somebody in your backyard? Well, we're in the state of Washington, and Washington is one of three states that don't allow burial in the backyard. And there's reasons for it. There's legislation, there's legal reasons, and I think it's Washington, California, and Indiana. But there's nine states that do allow it, and I don't know about the rest, but they do. But
I
there's
believe
something.
Vermont is one.
Is
Vermont
Vermont
is the state, I think, that does
of
allow.
nine states that allow? I'm sure Vermont is because they've come a long ways with terramation as well.
Mm.
Um, but I find that interesting because people sometimes, if they want a home service, or the person dies at home and then they have a service there, sometimes they want to bury them in the backyard. They don't want the transport or any of that. But you better check your state's laws because they are pretty firm and strict on that. And cost, of course, is always the other question I get asked. Recompose is close to 7,000, whereas return home is probably closer to 5,000 now. And but then you look at the average cost of funerals, and that can be anywhere from 7 to 10, and even above 10, depending on the service you want, the cost of the casket, the location. Um, in New York, for instance, they pay on the upper end. So it really depends geographically where you live
Well,
too.
here in Seattle, we can pay on the upper end. I've heard that this was a few years ago, that um, the high end cost for a burial at a cemetery in the Seattle at the top tier was over $35,000, and that was prior to COVID. Um, and so you think about that, and that's something to take into account. Some people might want that. And I know my mom, the staunch Catholic that she is, wants a full burial in a casket being involved. That's it. She just can't even imagine any other type. And you brought that up earlier, religious preferences.
Yeah, there are, and you have to, it's a really a personal experience. And as a doula, you want, if you have a chance to do the pre-planning of this with the individual who is dying and their family, that can be really important to get that nailed down. When I do my teaching at Cancer Lifeline, I noticed that some people like us hadn't known that there were other ways besides cremation.
I think
And then
most people don't know that.
that throws them into a whirlwind because they're facing mortality sooner.
Mhm.
And they think, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about this. So I think, there's nothing wrong with the options. The options are going to continue to grow.
Well, that's
It's nothing wrong with not having a traditional funeral, and there's nothing wrong if you decide to have one. I
right.
mean, it's really a personal thing.
That's just like, as there's no one right way to grieve, there's no one right way to have your burial, and it's all choice. And I do know, like with my family, religion does come into it because I come from a very Catholic family, and so when I mentioned green burial to my mom, it's just like, oh no. I can't ever do that. And she's so funny. She thinks we are going to cremate her. And she keeps saying, one of my younger brothers, your brother has promised me that he won't allow me to be cremated. She just doesn't want that. And I'm like, Mom, we will always honor what you want. I think because I'll talk about these other options just out of interest. And so always honoring and respecting someone's beliefs, whether they're cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, that, especially when we're doulas working with people, as you brought up, Colleen, that's what we're there to be, non-judgmental, um, and just be open and receptive and have the option. So I know a lot about traditional burial. I know a lot about cremation. And now I know more about the other options too.
Yeah, and it's just interesting that people are now starting to do more life celebrations,
Mhm.
and then they can move into whatever choice of burial they want from there. That you can have a celebration while you're living and invite people in. It's kind of like a service. And then you can have your regular traditional funeral if you want, or you can have aquamation or terramation. I mean, you can do any. I think it's important. It's just people's reasons, and there are psychological things that go behind the decision. But I have a feeling the more death is brought out in the open in our culture, the more people will pause maybe and think about their options, that they have choices.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's the reason we did this, so people know that there are choices out there.
I can't believe it, Maureen. We're at our time again. It's always like that. And I always feel like I can keep going with this. But we want to thank all of our viewers for joining us today. And you can find us on Facebook at under Challenging Conversations. Just search for Challenging Conversations and join us there. Let us know if you have topics you want to discuss. There's certain things that are of interest to you. And also visit us on Gentle Passage Doula Collective, where our doula trainings are listed along with our Death Cafe. And September 13th is a big day coming up where we have a virtual class, and it's for 8 weeks. And then we have another class that's in person October 28th and 29th. And so, and our Death Cafe, I believe, is the second Friday of every month at
Tomorrow, yes.
12:30 to 1:30. And so we're really busy, and we have webinars that talk about we go into depth on certain topics. I mean, we recently had Kathleen gave one on trauma recently. I've got one coming up on life review. Maureen does advanced directives and many other things. We all have our collective takes part in teaching people with these in-depth webinars that are open really to everyone. And our graduates, of course, get so many for free for being our graduates. And so I'm kind of excited about that because we're all about, sharing in the community. So did I leave anything out, Maureen, that you
No, I
can
don't
think
think so.
of?
Not that I can think of,
Um,
but I think, like you said, you just said community, but that's one thing that's really important to us is building community. And
yeah,
so we just love the community that we've built and continue to build.
yeah, yeah. So, well, I'm Colleen Hughes, and here with my co-host Maureen. Kathleen should be back with us next week, and we've got some interesting guests coming up. And check us out. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye bye.